As a level, I can appreciate a lot of what Whitespace tries to do. It's a very clear departure in concept from a lot of Xender games' earlier levels, with Xender game intending to use visuals and text to tell the player a story and try to leave them with a lasting message. Whitespace is certainly not the first level to do this, with others such as Deprivation by Split72, Polymer by Serifify, and Why Me Why Me Why Me Why Me by TMN Gaming having gained some popularity prior to the previewing and subsequent release of Whitespace. However, it does seem to be Xender's first attempt at this, and Whitespace aims to take a different approach than these levels. However, Whitespace ends up becoming more of an identity crisis, and leaves the player feeling confused after watching or playing it, rather than with a lasting impact. To start off this review, I'd like to point out a lot of the good aspects of a level that I feel does its own form of storytelling well, Polymer by Serifify. Polymer is a level that has inspired a lot of my own creations, both conceptually and visually. It really highlights its representation of certain concepts, feelings, or other entities, largely relying on symbolism in one form or another to communicate its message. For example, elements like these hands present throughout the level, these boxes in the flashy part, the faces near the ends, and the heptagons all play into this. As a quick editor's note, I'd like to point out another element of symbolism from Polymer that I forgot to mention here. This impenetrable circle with 3 dots that comes up early in the level reappears right at the end with 4 dots, and this is a big theme throughout the level. It's a piece of symbolism that went completely under the radar for me for a while, and now it's one of the most powerful parts of the level for me, so I just wanted to draw some attention to it. None of these elements are specifically explained to you in the level, but by playing the level and viewing each part in succession, the level conveys you something with the aid of the text. This form of vagueness is useful in some ways, as it can leave an effect on the player without outright telling them what to interpret, and the level is easy enough that this is accomplished well within it. In addition, the level song works with its melancholy grey atmosphere and slow gameplay, even complementing the intensity of the flashy section to make it that much more impactful, like you can see here. All of these elements combine to help create a level that I feel is almost unmatched in the way it tells its story, and one that still leaves an impact on me no matter how many times I've seen it. This obviously isn't the only way to tell a story, but it's a way that I think is very effective at telling a story. Like I said earlier, Whitespace chooses to take a different approach. Whitespace focuses a lot more heavily on raw visual wow factor, making heavy use of complex designs, backgrounds, dynamic, fluid effects, and flashing colors throughout, in comparison to Polymer's minimal effect usage, simple designs, and muted monochrome colors. I appreciate a lot of the effort that Xender put into this level, and his technical skill with the editor really shines through for most of it. Some elements such as these train cars, blueprint structures, these big bulbs, and the fluid transitions from part to part are visually very impressive, and do a great job capturing and holding the viewer's attention. In particular, the transitions that are present throughout most of the level are varied enough to not feel boring, while functioning well to help each part flow to the next. My personal favorite is this one with the pill. The scaling effect does a great job of almost pulling the player from one part to the next, and working with the block designs to immerse the player in an environment that feels digitized, almost surreal. All these elements are fairly typical for Xender Game, an award-winning creator with tons of technical skill and ambition within the editor. However, the problems I have with the level start to appear when I begin to consider what the purpose of the level is. Like I said previously, the level clearly wants to tell you something. It tries to achieve this through a combination of visuals, effects, and text, but it's very difficult to discern any form of direction and meaning the level tries to point you in terms of the story. With levels like Polymer, I walk away from it with a definitive feeling. The level knows what it wants to make you feel, and it delivers on that, ending off with the player feeling something tangible. Whitespace fails at that and leaves me feeling completely confused even after playing it multiple times. Due to the level lacking direction and choosing mainly to focus on visually impressing the player first and foremost, it's very hard for me to figure out what this level is trying to be, as its intent and ambition frequently get in each other's way. The level ends up feeling a bit like a grab for an epic, using a lot of common elements seen in modern epic rated levels, a feeling of polish, and the visual wow factor I previously mentioned through a combination of complex designs, smooth movements, fluid effects, and fun, well-play tested gameplay. There are some elements of the story that are very clear, the most obvious one being the end screen. However, this ends up feeling like more of a cheap way of tying things together in the level rather than anything truly meaningful, combined with the previous train crash scene that comes quite out of nowhere. This ends up making me feel more confused, as what little story I could gain from the level's surface was largely lost and whisked away by the wow factor of the visuals. A good example of this comes from the beginning part, as the text present throughout the part tries to give you bits and pieces of words that Xender game wants you to read, but ultimately has nothing else to back it up, either visually or otherwise. So any meaning of the text is lost in the level, as it just becomes another visual element. This is a recurring thing throughout much of the level, appearing in many different parts, with the only part I feel that the text actually helps the level's message being the end screen. The end screen is interesting, with the first clear message of the level being shown to the player in the form of a motivational speech of sorts from Xender game, while something resembling a phone call of desperation plays in the background. I can assume this phone call is from the aftermath of the train crash portrayed in the previous part, and it is a neat touch, making the level feel more personal and helping tie the ending message into the rest of the level, but ultimately it does nothing to address the other issues that I mentioned that come up in the storyline. This one section of clarity also feels very out of place rather than a fitting conclusion, and does not leave me with a lasting impact. In addition, there are many elements that feel like they are thrown in largely for the sake of the visuals alone, with Xender game trying to say that on the surface they're part of a story. Some short things like these text messages, this screen saying save who with the pills, the scissors, these other pills, and a screen saying easy way out that come up later in the level, the big hand reaching out to the player, and many, many more. It's clear to me as the player that they do mean something, and that Xender wanted to leave it up to the player for interpretation, but the problem I have with it is that it becomes so obscured by the visuals constructed meticulously to try and blow the player away that they end up being completely lost. It took me watching the level multiple times, paying attention to details, and picking the level apart so I could form the most complete and unbiased opinion on the level as I could, in order for me to understand what these meant. Any flow of the story is always broken by something that feels like it was thrown in just for the sake of the visuals, for that coveted epic rate and first place feature in the featured tab. The level feels quite hollow because of it, and does not deliver properly on its intent to tell the viewer the story because of that. Some of the things I've said up until this point don't matter much if the level is mostly made to be watched, and if that were the case, I think this level would work better. For example, if the level were in auto, it would remove the need to focus on the gameplay while playing the level, allowing for purely visual-based focus. Because playing the level comes largely with focusing on gameplay and the dynamic visuals that obscure it, this would definitely help the player to be able to take in more of the level's true intent in a way that's more intuitive, by removing most of the distraction and making it more akin to just watching the level. However, this certainly isn't the case, and Xender clearly does want people to play and enjoy the level. A lot of effort was put into making the level more playable, from the gameplay being extensively playtested to the over 8 months Xender spent optimizing the level's performance to make it less laggy. This again ties back into what I said about the level being a bit of an identity crisis. The song and gameplay are well synced, the song towards some of the latter parts of the level ended up feeling chaotic and desperate, working with the gameplay and deco to create a feeling of stress within the player. Here's a good example of what I mean. All of this goes to show that Xender did clearly want the level to be played and not just watched. The fact that the player needs to focus and play the gameplay, which, as a side note, is very learny and does indeed require a lot of the player's focus, detracts from the piecing together of the level's story in any meaningful way unless the level is replayed or rewatched multiple times. This would be okay if the level didn't focus much on the story and functioned fine as a level without it, similarly to a level like Heather Hayes by Heather Hayes. However, the story is made so prominent in the level through visual elements like I mentioned previously, that the level ends up losing part of itself if the story is ignored. This is especially true with the end screen, which like I said functions well to wrap the level up cohesively, but falls completely flat if the story is ignored, becoming just a train crash visualized with no context. Despite everything I just said, after watching the level enough to put something cohesive together, the story is quite powerful. I do appreciate the effort Xender game took to tell the player what he did, and I can relate to a lot of the themes that come up within the level, feeling isolated, having intrusive thoughts, etc. Nothing I say in this review goes to discredit that or any of Xender game's experiences, as I suppose this is just his way of getting them out to the world. Some of my words as well may be a product of my own ailments. Having ADHD, I find it quite difficult to focus my attention onto anything while playing a level, so it's absolutely possible that this is mostly a me issue for having so much trouble figuring out the story. However, I do hope that the level's flaws are seen and understood, and that in the future people will take them into account more in their own creations, to create levels that tell a story in a way that's more intuitive, personal, and matches their own intentions in a way that they want it to. As a final note, thank you so much for listening through until this point. This level was a long time in the making, with the script alone taking me over a week to write. I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts on this, and please do go send some support to Xender Game. In case you haven't seen the level in full, here's a full showcase of it. Hope you enjoy.